big challenge for our buyers. Like, we do have a lot of first home buyers that go, oh, the agent said this, or they seem really genuine, X, Y, Z. And I'm like, no. The agent is operating for the seller. They're not your team member. Like, if you have an independent valuation, they're on your team because you're paying them. If you have a lawyer, they're on your team because you're paying them. The agent's being paid by the seller, so they're very much not on your team. And if you hear them saying it's a particular number or they're not going to go within, below that, then most of the time they're just trying to increase their commission. So I think using data or a Seagars, a provider that's objective is far more valuable. Welcome to Slice, property made possible. We're a platform on a mission to reduce barriers to home ownership. This podcast is a safe space for our community to learn together and build the confidence required to start on their property journey. When you're ready to start, head along to slicetobuy.com and sign up for your free dashboard. Welcome back to Slice the podcast. We are joined today by Reid Quinlan from Seagars. Hello, Reid.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us. Hey, we like to kick things off by taking you back in time and considering your first home purchase. What is it that you remember about that?
I'm a bit older than you, so it's about 25 years ago. But I bought an apartment in town and just a little two-beddy.
In Auckland?
In the city here, yeah. And it was actually a fairly easy experience for me because I was about 30 and by then I was earning quite good money and I had quite a good deposit and it wasn't a difficult process. But, I mean, working in property, I sort of knew what to expect anyway. So I had that for a couple of years and it worked out okay. Managed to sell it before they found it was a leaky building, so that was a positive.
Yeah, positive for you and not so positive for the buyer after you. Yeah. And when you were working in property at that time, what kind of industry or part of the property industry?
Yeah, so I started at Seagars as a graduate valuer after doing a property degree at Auckland University. So you have to do about 3 years of actual valuation work and then you become a registered valuer, which is when, really it's up to you as to how you want your career to proceed from there. So at that stage I was working really hard and earning good money and it made it easier to buy an apartment.
Yeah. And you've obviously progressed with Seagars as well to today.
Yeah, well, it's one of those firms that people find just works. It's a relaxed place and
good culture.
Good culture, and there's no we don't give people grief, and people are free to sort of work their own things out. And so 30 years later, I'm still doing that, but I now
Congrats.
Own half the company, and it's it's a good place to work still. I go and enjoy each day. Valuation's quite a career where every day is interesting and different. A different problem. You might be valuing a $100 million office building, then you might be valuing a $1 million piece of land, then you might look at an apartment or something. And
it's really sort of a broad variety of kind of valuations that you're doing.
Yeah. Most of my stuff is commercial these days and a bit of expert witness stuff in the courts and things like that. So
cool.
That's also, quite challenging.
From a basic level, because a lot of our audience are sort of in that first home buyer space, can you explain what Seagars sort of does?
Yeah, so we're just a private valuation company. We take instructions from people buying and selling properties, and sometimes, like relevant to your audience, that'll be first home buyers who might want just an idea of what they should offer before an auction.
Yeah.
So we'll do a sort of a brief report for them, and it might say, we think it's going to be 1.4 million to 1.5 million.
Yeah.
Enough to give them the confidence to go and bid, and particularly for someone who's unsure about the market.
And doesn't want to make the wrong decision and overpay as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I've actually organised the valuer for a property I'm trying to buy, which I'm not very sure about the market on, and so I'm going to rely on his advice. So it's even experts, there's fields that we're not experts in.
Yeah, and there's data that we might not have access to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a really massive one, and we actually have spoken about it a bit just through socials, but there's a heavy reliance on online sites like homes.co.nz or Trade Me, and actually, it can be an agent that's placing that house within a range and it's not necessarily, accurate in its data or representation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, some of the information is now much better than it was. Like
Yeah.
homes.co.nz, I find it's quite valuable to get a broad ballpark price. Sometimes it's way off for some reason.
Yeah, I've
like,
still seen the odd property sell like 500K above, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, if there's been work done in a property and it's not picked up in the rating valuation, the home's estimate will be off, that sort of thing. But it's all good data for finding the sales in the area, and that's probably what people should be looking at on those platforms more, rather
Is like looking at the other properties that are selling and what
Yeah.
they're selling for.
Yeah, it's quite good with those on the screen, those little red dots you can find. You can zoom in on those and go, oh, that one sold for 1.3, that one sold for 1.5.
Yeah,
that's
because
really
then you're
how
getting actual, current day sales data, as opposed to it could be, it's less of a range and more of a someone paid this amount for a house that's of similar size or in a similar area, or it's more, accurate.
Well, yeah, the data we get as valuers is only a little bit more accurate than the homes stuff. That's pretty good. There
Yeah.
are just some of these sources that don't feed on quite as fast.
Yeah.
So we're doing exactly the same thing. If we're valuing a house, we print out off our database a set of sales. We go and look at them and we go, I'd rather have that one. I think it's better than that one. I'd rather have that one.
So you're actually going in and looking at the properties as well?
At least looking from the street. And these days, there's great online pictures for a lot of them. So that's really helpful. You can go, oh, look, it's been renoed. It's much better.
Yeah.
So that's all valuation does. It's just a comparison of actual sales prices. And then we form a view, and it's a bit subjective. It could be, 1.3, could be 1.35 or 1.4, depending on,
But you narrow the range, I imagine, as opposed to, really broad range, because you're going, it could be anywhere between 1 and 1.5, which is a massive range. If you're even bringing it down to that sort of 100K gap, that's a lot more kind of, gives you a much sort of tighter range to work within.
Yeah, and a valuer should be able to give a reasonably refined range. And that's about as accurate as you can really get anyway, because markets have a natural variability.
Markets
that's plus or minus
fluctuate.
5%.
Yeah, but then if you're looking at properties that have sold recently as well and that kind of data, that's also giving you an indicator, I guess.
Yeah, I just encourage people to go and look at what's sold, drive down the road and think, oh, what would I pay more or less for this property I want than that sale? And you'll soon enough get a feel for it. And particularly people in the market, once they've been to a few auctions, they'll know what they're going to pay. I've been doing this a bit lately. I've been on a bit of a buying rampage, and you soon get a feel for the limit that you want to go up to.
Yeah, and I think just hammering back to that point that you said, looking at sales data, because that's giving you, particularly if it is recent, that's giving you an idea to anchor to and say, I would pay more for that and that sold for this, or I'd pay less for that and that sold for this, as opposed to there's a 500K range that I'm looking at and I don't know. It is about comparing that to other properties.
Yeah, it also helps you defend against the agent's strategy of going, oh, look, this property is worth $1.8 million, and just getting that in your mind, and you think, oh, they want 1.8, maybe that's the price.
Yeah.
When that could be, often those are 20% or more above the actual value. So, and those properties, they just won't sell those properties. So you actually better to look at the sales, listen to the agent, go, nah, I'm not going to buy that property. I'm going to go and look at something else.
Yeah, if that's what you want, then no. I think that's a really big challenge for our buyers. Like, we do have a lot of first home buyers that go, oh, the agent said this, or they seem really genuine, X, Y, Z. And I'm like, no. The agent is operating for the seller. They're not your team member. Like, if you have an independent valuation, they're on your team because you're paying them. If you have a lawyer, they're on your team because you're paying them. The agent's being paid by the seller, so they're very much not on your team. And if you hear them saying it's a particular number or they're not going to go within, below that, then most of the time they're just trying to increase their commission. So I think using data or a Seagars, a provider that's objective, is far more valuable.
But it can be very challenging, and you can end up doubting your own view on value. Even as an experienced person, it's difficult in
just
the market.
From those conversations.
Yeah,
it's not, and that's so hard. If you think you've had 30 years in property and you still sort of find yourself doubting and wondering, what to believe. You can only imagine when someone's never had experience and it's their first home, they're just going to believe what they hear and what they're told. So we do advise caution in that regard.
Yeah, well, it's important they just look for all the resources they can to help them. And, companies like yours that are providing a bit of background support might just help them feel a bit more comfortable and then make a better decision, right?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that confidence, going back to what you said there. And I think across any part of the buying journey, but one really big part is actually having confidence when you're going to auction or when you're making an offer that actually you're being reasonable and you're comfortable paying that price and you're not, off the ballpark just because they want more, because everyone always wants more.
Yeah, and it is a real confidence thing. Like I've been in a few auctions the last couple of months and if you're the highest bidder and they still get you into the deal room and they tell you these stories about how, you're nearly there, another $100,000. But really as a buyer, you've got a lot of power then because you're the person who has turned up on the day saying, look, I'm going to offer this much and this is what I've offered. And you can sort of tell them to, well, no, this is the offer and just be prepared to walk away.
Yeah, you've got to be prepared to walk away. I think that's the thing. And first home buyers I remember starting to feel a bit desperate. The market was more competitive at the time, although it's picking up again now, I think, from what I'm seeing. But I remember just thinking, no, we need to get this one, and you just need to kind of slow that when you're starting to feel that emotional kind of desperation coming through and actually go, no, just take your time. But that said, what have you sort of been seeing at the auctions you've been going to? What's the general vibe been?
So we've had very low supply, and that's typically what happens in a slow market. People won't sell their properties because unless they really have to. And then if they do, sometimes they're testing the waters and sometimes they're actually going to meet the market, the ones you want to find. And so in the last couple of months, a lot of those ones who are prepared to meet the market have been vacuumed up by a bit of rising demand. We'll see probably a reasonable boost of listings come on with people feeling a bit more optimistic and hoping to catch a bit of a rise in prices. But it's going to be, there's no fuel for the fire. Interest rates haven't fallen yet. Investors are still out of the market. I can't see it really taking off. It might be, another slow start to the year.
Yeah, gradually increasing, but not sort of rapidly.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean, I think that supply one's interesting. It's a broader issue in New Zealand with us not having enough supply of housing. So it'll be interesting to see if as that picks up, there's any, reduction. But I think you're right that because that supply has been reduced, actually, you'll find there's been more demand for the limited amount of houses that have been in market. Do you think, this is one thing that I've thought about, do you think that some of the houses that, have shown the story of housing prices dropping have actually been lemons that people have had to sell over that period and haven't been able to hold on to?
No, I think it's more circumstantial than that because the market's pretty broad and, out of every 5,000 sales, there'll be 2,000 or 3,000 that just have to sell for a genuine reason.
Yeah.
Someone's died or someone's, people are
or
moving.
They're moving, or
I mean, we bought a property in a mortgagee auction recently. It was just a bit of bad luck for the person involved, but good luck for us.
Yeah.
I don't think that certainly wasn't a lemon. It was a very nice property, and I think you'll still find good properties come up even in these quiet times.
Yeah. What sort of trends are you kind of thinking out, like as confidence does start to increase? Because at the moment we've got migration up, about 110,000 plus people coming into New Zealand net. We've got investors potentially coming back into the market with National now and government. Are you expecting that, you said initially next year you might, you're not expecting it to go gangbuster right away, but is that something that you're expecting, the impact of some of those?
Yeah, at some
changes?
stage it'll go. I have spent a bit of time trying to analyse past booms and cycles, and they typically go like a 10-year cycle, and they go from the early years of the decade up to about a 50 to 100% boost, and they sort of taper off. But then we've had just a 3-year up and down cycle, which is really bizarre. It's never happened before that I can see in the last 50 years. I'm not quite sure how we're going to go from here. It's not typical, but it may well bounce back up to that sort of, back to 2021 prices. I'm sort of expecting that to happen, but it might be another year or two away That's my gut feel.
slow return kind of.
Yeah.
And do you think that's mostly in relation to interest rates or just a variety of factors, business confidence and?
Yeah, it's the interest rates that are stopping it happening effectively at the moment,
Yeah. And what about your sort of personal portfolio? Because you've mentioned you've, picked up a recent property, been at auctions. What does that look like at the moment?
Yes, we bought 3 apartments in the city, and one's in a bit of a remediation project, so it's quite risky for a first home buyer because you've got a lot of costs you may or may not be able to recover. You want a profit margin. Another one's just a one-bedder unit, and another one's a two-bedder unit we're just settling on today. And then we'll just rent those out. And so the key there is a bit of diversification, not all your eggs in one basket. And apartments provide quite a high income return. It's probably 5% on those after paying all the rates and outgoings. So that's those are quite good. And then we bought this house like in a new build area. It's about 10 years old, but a 4-bedroom house, and that's rented quite easily.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's diversification.
Are you diversifying across the regions, or is this mostly in Auckland, or?
Mostly in Auckland. I mean, we're looking at a batch. We've got an agreement on at the moment. But
is that for you personally, just to go and relax?
It's a family thing, I mean, I was going to say, your first home buyer's journey, it's actually less about the logic and more about finding a place often for your family, because most people are like in their 30s and there's often, hooking up and getting married and thinking about kids, some people, and then, that might be the key driver on how you decide what house you're going to buy.
Because you actually want to live in it, or you don't necessarily
you
want to
live in
it.
And, and like after my apartment we bought a house and bought another bigger house, and it's like, well, that sucked up all our capital for quite a long time, but they were nice places to live. So it's not always a financial consideration buying your first home.
Yeah, there is an emotional element to it. But I think it's really interesting that you say that, because we're also, there's people like Hannah that have found their way into the market a lot sooner, and there's a lot of aspiring homeowners in their 20s that are wanting to do it and then not necessarily live in it, but potentially start on that wealth journey. And I guess that's where there's actually more opportunities, is actually for them to buy something a bit cheaper, buy an apartment that has really great rental yield, or the ability to basically get rent in that covers that mortgage. So I think it's, if you catch them early enough, there's maybe more opportunities for it to be a financial decision and not so much an emotional one.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So you've obviously got a mixture of both, though, in your portfolio, some emotional, some financial. Is it more apartments that you've been interested in as opposed to like capital gains in existing properties, or?
I think you just need a mix. You need the income off the apartments, and there's small amounts of money to, and they're not hard to buy and sell. There's, you go and buy 10 one-bedroom units tomorrow if you wanted to.
Yeah.
In terms of, it doesn't take a lot of investigation, and, they're easy. The body corporate does the maintenance.
So as long as you're kind of confident that the body corporate's got their bits and pieces together, you can sort of buy in and out a bit easier maybe than...
Yeah. And on that, it's quite hard for buyers. You have to do a bit of due diligence by reading all those body corporate minutes and finding out what's going on in the buildings. And that's quite an educational process for people to do, and quite essential.
Yeah, our lawyers support with that, and we do kind of have fixed fees across the different types of property, because there's different documents, obviously, for different types of investments. What about from a valuation perspective, though? Like, do you think it's easier to value a particular type of property, or do you think it's sort of just as difficult across the board?
It's quite easy to value apartments and sort of houses in generic areas, like a villa in Mount Eden, or like a one-bedroom apartment in a tower with a city view. I mean, you easily find 10 properties that are similar that have sold that you can form a value on. The harder ones are something a little bit unique in terms of, they might be a waterfront thing, or they might have extra land or something strange about them.
I guess waterfront and some of the insurance issues we've had recently with flooding, obviously climate change, and we're now seeing climate erosion and climate inundation coming through on the limbs and everything. Is that something you're taking into your consideration through the valuation process at Seagars?
It would be if you're doing a site that was quite low-lying and hadn't been built up, because if you want to build on that site in the future, you've actually got to build up to 3.5 metres above
Got to
sea
get
level
some
or something.
piles in or whatever.
Well, you need to actually put fill on the side and get it up to the right height. So that can be quite an aspect. The insurance, I don't know so much. I mean, it's probably just reflected in the sales. You get 3 water. I mean, if you're valuing a beachfront property, you're going to look at beachfront sales, and they all have the same risk. So that's inferred in the comparisons we're making already.
Yeah. Although if it's not a consideration, I mean, then it's not necessarily a guarantee that insurance is coming into it, or the longevity of that property and the value over the, next 10 years as opposed to the next 2 years.
Yeah, like I personally, I'm not that big on a beachfront property.
Yeah.
I think being on top of a cliff is more private anyway.
Yeah.
So that's my preference. And I suppose there's enough people in the market making that decision that'll slowly move beachfront prices slightly relatively lower and clifftop slightly relatively higher.
Yeah, so the market's almost deciding that, and that's sort of how the data reacts.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I had a great episode with Blair from his CEO of Tower, and just talking about what they're looking for. And obviously you can't necessarily say these houses are uninsurable or anything like that. It's more of just the cost of insurance increases. So the cost to maybe maintain increases, and then there's always the risk that you do have to sell, or that you end up lodging a claim if it does flood, or there is that challenge. So I guess it comes down to the buyer's appetite for risk at the end of the day, which is sort of what you're saying if you're more focused on the cliff lifestyle. Where is this batch that you're looking at buying?
In the far north of Kerikeri. So and that's not on the beach, it's above the beach.
Yeah, imagine if you're like, it's beachfront, and I'm like, oh, my bad. My bad. Yeah, nice. Yeah. I actually bought my first home in Raglan, so in a way I'm like thinking of that as my batch before my home, but it's great to sort of have somewhere to go away to.
Do you still have that?
Yeah, I still have it, but I do rent it out. Right. So for a while there I had boarders in there, and then I would still be able to go in there because, I'm young and hip, I'm a cool flatmate. But now I rent out the whole place, which is great. Hopefully one day it'll just end up being my batch.
Yeah, you better retire there in a few years.
Yeah, it's still really convenient to Auckland as well. I think there were elements of that with my first home purchase where I was actually trying to buy in Auckland and I couldn't afford to, and I bought in Raglan, but I still wanted the house to be really tidy and really cool, and I feel like that was the emotional perspective, whereas maybe now I would buy something else that wasn't as much to my taste but was going to rent really well, or so when you look at the property that you bought in Kerikeri, do you think, or about to buy, do you think that looks quite different to your investment approach in terms of?
Oh yeah, like the investment return would be very little. Basically the higher value you go, the lower the percentage return. So it doesn't make a lot of sense from for the income perspective, even if you did rent it out. But you're sort of consuming that value, and ideally, hopefully there'll be long-term capital gain, and that will be greater as well, because really it's land value that appreciates, not house values. So any good position is you're buying more land than house. Yeah.
But then sometimes if you are, sometimes it does cost more in the first place too, right? So some of those high value, would you see capital appreciation the same, or do you think it's?
Oh yeah, I think you're more like the apartments, they won't appreciate as fast as the houses on a piece of land. Because as I say, the apartments are about 75% improvements value and 25% land value, whereas your house is more like 50-50 usually, or 60-40. And as I say, buildings just get older and depreciate, and land value just generally appreciates.
Yeah.
But it's a bit tricky with that logic right now, because we've got a bit of uncertainty about the planning in Auckland with that plan change 78. Is that going to go through? Is that all that extra subdivision potential that's applied to a massive part of the suburbia?
Yeah.
If you do it all at once, you actually increase the supply massively of land. So right now, the prospect of land going up in, say, Glenfield or areas like Browns Bay, we've been looking at, not so certain as normal because of that potential additional supply coming on.
And then obviously you move into sort of more medium density housing though, right? With houses kind of quite close together. Does that not, whilst it increases supply, so probably, has quite an immediate impact on the value of the houses in that area, does that also mean though that over time those houses that were there first that have, a larger area or of land, that they will still sort of appreciate more as a trend?
Over the longer term, they will, yeah.
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 But they might be hit sort of initially based on that supply.
I'm just a bit worried, because I have been looking in that sort of around good school zones on the shore.
Yeah. I have a place in Birkenhead, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at those old 70s, 80s houses. I think there's a bit of risk on the prices there, but some of them very well located, and we're still looking in the area, but I just don't want to pay too much. I don't want to pay the price they would have paid 2 years ago based on big subdivision potential. I want to pay the price they're asking now, which is 15% less.
Yeah, and I guess what you're talking about there as well is your general portfolio and the diversification. If you throw too much money into one property as well, then you can't kind of diversify your risk across different areas. Yeah, interesting. We're in Birkenhead, but we have been living there, so it's a little bit different.
But you can always rent that out, though. It's a
Yeah.
good location for rentals.
Yeah, a great location from a rental perspective. And I guess going back to that, yes, hopefully there will be more supply in market, because let's be honest, we need it. That's one of the main reasons we're in a housing crisis in New Zealand. But at the same time, we have migration coming through and combating that. So it's any supply that we can get going, and the cost of supply to build houses has been increasing. I think that's still going to put pressure on any new builds that are popping up over the next wee while.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting problem we've created by allowing so many people in such a short time. That's, back in 2017, 2018, we were worrying about how we could accommodate 50,000 extra people for the year.
Yeah.
So we've got more than double that. And, certainly the rental market's responding quite quickly already, and it's going to make it better for the investors and encourage them in a little bit sooner than otherwise.
So I was saying, with migration and the cost of building, though, obviously that's another factor that can create pressure on the supply regardless.
Yeah, well, I guess, we've got plenty of building capacity with the commercial market and the residential market easing off in terms of building activity. So there'll be building potential. There'll be rising rents from that massive boost of immigration, and eventually interest rates will come down, and it'll make sense to build apartment blocks to accommodate everybody again.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting watching what happens. It's a bit like throwing all the cards up in the air and seeing where they land, because there's quite a few influences going on there.
Yeah, there is, and it's which one's strong.
But at the end of the day, it's you got to house people, right? And that's demand. That's raw demand.
Yeah, and that's the challenge that we've got as a country. There's always been, or for a long time at least, more demand than there has been supply.
Yeah.
And growing populations.
Yeah, I think is that about 15, 20 years ago, there was a Department of Building and Housing report saying that the biggest impact on Auckland house prices was returning Kiwis, not so much just raw immigration, but Kiwis returning home and tending to be, in that family sort of age and buying houses. But that isn't the immigration we're getting right now. So
it's actually a bit of both, but yeah, it's a really interesting point, because there's immigration, but there's kind of two segments to that, some of which is returning Kiwis, some of which is not. Some actually are, might own properties in overseas and look to buy here, but others might actually just be renting. So that breaks up into different kind of, I guess, segments, the net migration that's now in New Zealand. So it's not all 110,000 returning Kiwis who are definitely going to buy houses. Some of them are actually unable to and will be renting. So
I think most will be renters.
Yeah, interesting.
All those people in the Philippines and Indian people who are they'll be working, but they won't have probably a lot of equity to buy homes. So I think that's...
And a big part of that as well is that regardless, that's an indirect, impact on the housing market, because if there's a lot of renters, there's a lot of people to rent to, which means you can make money on owning the properties and renting them out. So it's a more indirect kind of pressure that's placed on the housing market. But it's super interesting when we think back to, when these interest rates were initially rising and everyone was saying, well, there's no point in buying a house because I'm going to be paying more for my mortgage than I am, in rent. But that was actually only for a period of time. And it is a lagging factor that, interest rates increase first, the landlords are hit soon after, and renters then receive that I guess from the landlords once they start lifting rents. So it's not like you're ever going to find rents to be vastly cheaper than what the landlords are willing to offer. So if it impacts landlords, it impacts renters.
Yeah, and I think looking at even renting out properties on a short-term basis isn't really the right sort of viewpoint. My experience has been that everyone says that property values double every 10 years, and that's kind of what they do.
Is that what you've sort of seen in the 30 years at Seagars?
Yeah. I kicked myself because I didn't buy enough early enough.
Yeah.
But that is pretty much how it goes. Some 10-year periods, it's a 50% increase, not a 100% increase, but that's what we've seen for 50 years. So I know the world could end and that might not happen, but for most people it does happen, and it has happened and continues to happen. And, as long as you buy it with a view that, in 5 or 10 years' time I might sell a property or something, pay off the debt, and then I've got a lot bigger asset base, that's probably a good long-term strategy. Not be too worried about, the overs and unders. This year I'm $20,000 down of income.
Yeah.
It's going to work out.
It's that long-term sort of view, right? And that strategy that, maybe there'll be 2 or 3 years right now where you're paying more in interest than you are receiving in rent. But if you can hold, then the capital gains that you even get back over that, 5-year period may be enough to should be enough to kind of manage that and balance it out.
Yeah, although this our new government hasn't said anything about the bright line test yet about what they're going to do that I've seen in the last few weeks.
No, I did see, it was more a few months ago though, that there was him on video saying he would reduce it. So if we can believe what politicians say, then I think it will happen. I think it's very on brand for them to do that though. So I
expect so, yeah.
Yeah, I expect that they will do that, and they will bring back interest rate deductibility and all of that will encourage the investors back in. But as you say, maybe that's why there's not necessarily an immediate shift right now. It's because they're all feeling confident and ready to go, but maybe some are just dragging their tails going, we'll wait until that policy and is brought in.
Yeah, the interest deductibility will certainly help, a few other changes. So we'll see, I suppose.
Yes. To your benefit, but not necessarily to the first home buyer's benefit. But hey, it's the system that we've created, and once you get in, you can play the game. I guess that's one way to look at it. On that note, we have our final question, which is, if one of your homes or your batch perhaps had a doorbell and that doorbell played a theme song, Reid, what would it play?
It would have to be something country.
Something country. I get a bit of a country vibe from you. The way you're sitting, you could almost be there with like a guitar having a little...
Yeah, I couldn't give it an exact song, but it would definitely be a country song.
An artist? Do you have an artist?
Perhaps some Garth Brooks, old school 90s country.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to hear more about what you do at Seagars and the importance around valuations. Yeah, can't be more sort of, I guess, taught about and educated around, because it's such a huge thing when purchasing your first home that you actually do make a good investment. Yeah, well, thank you, and good luck to your audience. I'm sure the more they can learn about the ins and outs, the better it's going to help. Absolutely. Thanks, Reid. Thank you for joining our community. Buying property isn't easy, but listening in will get you one step closer on your journey. Please leave an Apple or Spotify review and provide feedback so we can improve your experience. Join our Facebook group, A Safe Space to Learn Together, or follow us on Instagram at Slice2Buy. If you have any questions or topics you would like us to touch on, you can email us at hello@slice2buy.com. A quick reminder, Slice the podcast does not provide personalised investment advice. We are not acting as financial advisors or taking into account your circumstances. To get personalised advice, join us at slice2buy.com and engage with our partners who can act as your financial advisor or lawyer and support you with your specific needs.